Robert Calloway thought he had won when his designer shoe connected with the sick girl's leg. The $50,000 a year frequent flyer believed his platinum status would shield him from consequences, just like it always had. What he couldn't know, was that the quiet man in 3D had been recording everything. Dr. Elliot Marsh's phone captured every cruel word, every heartless gesture, every moment of Robert's assault on a terminally ill child. As Robert smugly adjusted his expensive jacket, savoring his petty victory over a 14-year-old girl too weak to fight back, the video was already uploading to a cloud server. In exactly 7 minutes, Robert Calloway's life would be over. He leaned back in his seat, straightened his jacket, and said, "Mauvais, I didn't pay for this." The flight attendants froze. The passengers froze, and that little girl, tears running silently down her face, looked at her mother and whispered, "I'm okay." 10 minutes later, that plane stopped dead in the sky. If you are watching this right now, and you believe that every human being deserves dignity, no matter their age, their race, or their health, then this story is for you. Please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Now let us get into it. The day had started like any other for Jasmine Carter. She was 14 years old, and she had learned earlier than most children ever should that life does not always play fair. She had also learned something else, that you hold your chin up anyway. That was something her mother Denise had told her so many times. It had become a kind of heartbeat in Jasmine's chest. Hold your chin up, baby. No matter what they say, no matter what they do, you hold it up. And so Jasmine held it up. She held it up when the nurses at the hospital poked her arms for the 4th time in one visit. She held it up when other kids at school whispered about her and why she missed so many days. She held it up when she sat in waiting rooms and doctors' offices and heard words that no child should have to understand at her age. And she held it up now, walking through the jet bridge toward the plane that would carry her and her mother from New York to Los Angeles, toward a specialist, toward answers, toward whatever came next. Denise walked beside her, one hand resting gently on Jasmine's shoulder blade, not gripping, not hovering, just present, just there. That was Denise's way. She was a tall woman, graceful and quiet in the way the people who have carried enormous weight for a long time tend to become. Her eyes moved over everything. The other passengers, the flight attendants greeting them at the door, the long aisle stretching ahead with a watchfulness that never quite turned off. "First class," Jasmine murmured, glancing at the wide seats on either side of the forward cabin. "First class," Denise confirmed. And there was something in her voice, something careful and proud at the same time. She had saved for this months of it. She was not going to let her daughter make that cross-country trip in a middle seat in the back, while she was already feeling the way she was feeling. If Jasmine was going to fly, she was going to fly comfortably. That was not a negotiation. They found their row seats 3A and 3B window and middle, and settled in. Jasmine leaned her head back almost immediately, and Denise watched her for a moment before pulling out the thin blanket from the overhead bin and draping it across her daughter's lap. "You comfortable?" Denise asked quietly. Jasmine said, eyes already half closed. Denise sat down. She folded her hands in her lap. She breathed. The cabin continued to fill around them. Robert Calloway boarded 12 minutes later. He came down the aisle the way certain men moved through the world, with the absolute, unquestioned certainty that whatever space he was about to occupy had been waiting for him. He was in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered, wearing a jacket that costs more than most people's rent. His hair was graying at the temples, in the way that is frequently described as distinguished. His shoes were polished. His carry-on was designer. His expression, as he navigated toward his seat, was that particular kind of blankness that is not actually blankness at all. It is disdain so constant it has simply become the resting state of the face. He reached row 3 and stopped. He looked at Jasmine. He looked at Denise. He looked at the seat number on his boarding pass 3C, the aisle seat, and then he looked back at Jasmine. Something shifted behind his eyes. It was subtle, but it was there. He stowed his bag without a word and sat down. For a while, nothing happened. The remaining passengers filed in. The flight attendants moved through their pre-departure routines. A man in row 5 ordered a drink before they had even pushed back from the gate, and the flight attendant smiled and said she would bring it as soon as she could. Soft music played somewhere, the ordinary, predictable theater of a departing flight. And then Jasmine shifted in her seat. It was a small movement. She adjusted her position, pulling the blanket a little higher, tilting slightly toward the window, as a faint wave of nausea moved through her. Her breathing changed just slightly. Not dramatically, just enough that someone sitting right next to her might notice. Robert noticed. He turned his head and looked at her. The way you look at something that has appeared in a place you consider yours. "She's sick," he said. He did not say it to Jasmine. He said it to Denise across Jasmine's lap, as though the girl were not there at all. Denise looked at him. Her expression did not change. "She's fine," she said. "She's resting." "She doesn't look fine," Robert said. His voice had an edge to it. Not quite open hostility yet, but something approaching it. Something warming up. "She looks like she's got something. Is she contagious?" "She is not contagious," Denise said, and the steadiness in her voice was remarkable. "My daughter has a medical condition. She is not a danger to anyone on this flight." Robert made a sound. It was not quite a word. It was the kind of sound that communicates everything without technically saying anything. Contempt dressed up as concern. "Well," he said, leaning back and adjusting his collar. "I paid a significant amount of money for this seat. I didn't pay for this." Denise looked at him for a long moment. "Neither did she," she said. The flight pushed back from the gate. The safety demonstration played. The engines built to their departure roar. And then the ground dropped away, and they were airborne, climbing steeply over the city, the towers and the bridges, and the gray winter water, all falling small behind them. Jasmine slept, or something close to sleep. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. Denise kept one hand resting near her daughter's arm. Robert beside them had not relaxed. He had his phone out, doing the things people do with phones when they are pretending not to be bothered by something that is in fact bothering them very much. He shifted. He glanced sideways. He shifted again. He flagged down a flight attendant, a young woman named Carmen. Early 30s, calm and efficient, and ordered a scotch. "Neat." Carmen brought it. She was about to move on when Robert stopped her. "That girl," he said, keeping his voice low and angling it away from Denise, though not nearly far enough. "The one in 3B. Is there another seat available in first class? Can you move her?" Carmen kept her expression professional. "Sir, I'm asking if you can move her to a different seat. She's obviously unwell, and I'd prefer not to spend a 5-hour flight sitting next to someone who's sick. It's a reasonable request." Carmen held the pause for exactly 1 beat. "I'll check on availability for you, sir," she said. "Can I get you anything else in the meantime?" "What you can get me," Robert said, lifting his scotch, "is a seat change." Carmen smiled tightly and moved away. Denise had heard every word. She said nothing. She looked straight ahead, and the only sign that anything had registered at all was the very slight tightening of her jaw. Jasmine's eyes opened. "Mom," she said softly. "Just that." "It's okay," Denise said. "Go back to sleep." I heard him. "I know you did. He wants them to move me." "He's not going to get what he wants," Denise said quietly. "Close your eyes." Jasmine looked at her for a moment. 14 years old and already carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who has been made to feel like an inconvenience. Not once, not twice, but so many times that she has stopped being surprised by it and started simply being tired. Then she closed her eyes again. Carmen returned 5 minutes later. "Sir," she said to Robert, "I'm sorry. First class is fully booked this flight. There are no available seats." Robert looked at her. "Then move someone else." "I'm sorry. Move someone else to accommodate the request." "That's what customer service means, isn't it, problem solving?" "I understand your concern," Sir Carmen said. And her professionalism was a remarkable thing to witness. Absolutely uncrackable on the surface, but anyone paying attention could see the careful work happening behind her eyes. But our passengers are all settled, and we can't ask someone who's already seated to relocate without cause. I want to assure you that, without cause, Robert repeated. He laughed, but it was not a warm laugh. The cause is that there is an obviously sick child sitting in my row, and I have the right to a comfortable flight. You have my word that we'll do everything we can to make your flight comfortable, sir. Then move her. The exchange ended there. Technically, Carmen moved away, but it did not end in any real sense. The energy of it hung over row 3 like a low ceiling. 40 minutes into the flight, the drink cart came around again. The man across the aisle window seat, 3D, was reading a medical journal. He had barely looked up since boarding. He was tall and lean, somewhere in his early 50s, with the kind of unhurried, observant quality about him that suggested he spent a great deal of time paying attention. His name was Dr. Elliot Marsh, and he had been aware of the situation in row 3 from the moment it began. Not because he was nosy, because he was a doctor, and because the girl in 3B had the particular stillness of someone working hard to manage something that was not easy to manage. He had not intervened yet. He was watching. He was waiting to see if it resolved itself. It did not resolve itself. What happened next happened fast. Jasmine shifted again, more urgently this time, and a small sound escaped her, involuntary, the kind of sound you make when pain catches you off guard. Her hand went to her stomach. Her face, which had been pale before, went a shade paler. Robert looked at her. His face moved through something. Not concern, not sympathy, but a kind of heightened irritation. The irritation of someone whose experience is being disrupted in a way they consider unacceptable. "Hey," he said. Jasmine did not respond. She was focused inward on the pain, on keeping herself together. "Hey," Robert said again, louder. "Are you going to be sick? Because if you are, you need to go to the bathroom." "She's not going anywhere," Denise said, turning toward him fully now. "Leave her alone. She's making people uncomfortable." "She is a child in pain," Denise said. And her voice was still controlled, but something had entered it now. Not anger exactly, but something beneath anger, something older and more absolute. "And you need to stop talking." "Don't tell me what to do," Robert said. "I have just as much right to be comfortable as Robert." Both Denise and Robert turned. It was Carmen who had appeared, as if materialized by the tension itself. She was standing at the end of the row, and her expression had shifted. She had moved from professional neutrality into something more direct. "Sir, I need to ask you to lower your voice, please." "I'm not raising my voice," Robert said, which was not entirely accurate. "I'm having a conversation. I understand. I'm still asking you to lower it." He looked at her for a moment. Then he sat back and picked up his drink. The silence lasted about 4 minutes. And then Jasmine made a sound that was not small. It was a short, sharp gasp, the sound of someone whose body has just done something they weren't expecting. And then she was leaning forward, both hands pressed to her midsection. And Denise was up and calling for the flight attendant at the same moment that Dr. Elliot Marsh was already rising from 3D. "I'm a doctor," he said, moving past the armrest without hesitation. "What's happening?" "She has a condition. Her abdomen. She's been having episodes." Denise was talking fast, the practiced precision of a mother who has had to give this information in emergency situations before. "What condition?" "What's she been diagnosed with?" "They're still running tests. That's why we're going to LA. She has episodes of severe abdominal pain. They think it might be." Okay. Elliot crouched down, so he was at Jasmine's eye level. "Hey, I'm Dr. Marsh. Can you hear me? Can you tell me where the pain is?" Jasmine's eyes were open but glassy. Everywhere she whispered, scale of 1 to 10. She made a sound that was somewhere between a word and a moan. "Okay," he said. "That's okay. I've got you." He looked up at Carmen, who was already there, already leaning in. "I need to know what's in your medical kit. I need to know her baseline, and I need you to notify the captain that we may have a medical situation developing." Carmen was already reaching for her radio. Robert Calloway sat in his seat and watched all of this unfold and did not move. And then And this was the moment. This was the thing that no one in that cabin would ever entirely forget. He said it. He said, "Can we speed this up? Some of us are trying to have a comfortable flight." The words landed in the cabin, like something dropped from a height. The man in 4A, who had been typing on a laptop, stopped typing. The woman in 2C, who had been dozing, opened her eyes. Carmen stopped moving and looked at him and Denise. Denise, who had been holding herself together with everything she had, who had been calm and controlled and dignified through every slight and every dismissal and every moment of contempt this man had sent their way. Denise turned and looked at Robert Calloway with an expression that was very quiet and very still and absolutely devastating. "That is my daughter," she said. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. Those 4 words in that voice with that look carried everything that needed to be said, and several things that words could not touch. Robert opened his mouth. Then he closed it. "Doctor." Elliot Marsh had already turned back to Jasmine, but the set of his shoulders had changed. A barely perceptible tightening, the physical equivalent of a jaw clenching. "What's her name?" he asked Denise. "Jasmine." "Jasmine." He reached out and took her wrist, gently checking her pulse. "You're doing great. Stay with me." "Okay." "Can you take a breath for me, slow and deep?" Jasmine tried. It came out ragged. "That's okay. Try again. There you go. There you go." Carmen came back with the medical kit and crouched on the other side. She and Elliot communicated in the shorthand of people who are handling something serious. Quick, precise, no wasted syllables. The captain's voice came over the PA system calm and measured in the way that pilot voices always are, which somehow makes serious announcements more serious, not less. He said they were aware of a medical situation in the cabin and that the crew was attending to it. He asked passengers to remain seated with their seatbelts fastened. He said they would provide further updates. The plane had been cruising at 37,000 feet over the middle of the country, somewhere above the flat center of America, where the land stretches out in every direction with no particular shape. It was still flying. The engines were still running. The trajectory had not changed, but something had changed inside the cabin. In the particular pressure of those first-class seats in the 4 rows that could hear what was happening, in row 3 the atmosphere had become something different from what it had been 40 minutes ago. The casual comfort of first-class flight, the drinks and the noise and selling headphones, and the particular arrogance of forward cabinees had been replaced by something alert and uncomfortable and real. People were watching Robert. Not obviously not pointing, but watching, with the peripheral awareness of people who have witnessed something they cannot entirely process and are not quite sure what to do with. Robert was aware of it. He was a man accustomed to other people's awareness of him, but this was different from the kind he was used to. This did not feel like recognition or difference. This felt like something else. He picked up his scotch. He set it down again without drinking. Jasmine's breathing had begun to stabilize slowly, unevenly but moving in the right direction. Elliot's hands were steady. Denise was holding her daughter's hand, and she was not crying, but she looked like someone standing at the very edge of something and choosing moment by moment not to fall in. "She's stabilizing," Elliot said quietly. He looked at Carmen. "What's our ETA? Approximately 4 hours and 10 minutes. He nodded, said something else low. And then Jasmine, eyes half open, looked past everyone and looked at her mother. "Mom," she said, barely audible. "Right here," Denise said instantly. "I'm right here." "Don't be mad," Jasmine whispered. Denise blinked. "Don't be mad, baby." "Why would I know you're mad? I can feel it." "I'm not mad at you." "I know." The ghost of something moved across Jasmine's face. Not quite a smile, but neighboring one. "I know you're not." Denise pressed her daughter's hand to her lips for a moment, and the plane flew on. Robert Calloway sat very still in seat 3C. Outside the window, 37,000 feet of open air pressed against the reinforced glass. The engines held their steady roar. The PA system crackled once, and then went silent. He had not apologized. He had not spoken since the moment Denise had turned those 4 words on him like a searchlight. He sat with his drink and his designer jacket and his certainty. But the certainty close up did not look quite the same as it had when he had boarded the plane. It looked like something that had taken a crack and was working hard not to show it. The flight attendant from the rear cabin appeared at the front, a different one, older, named Brenda, who had worked this route for 11 years. And she leaned over and spoke quietly to Carmen. Carmen nodded. They exchanged a look that communicated something specific. The way colleagues communicate when the situation is shifted past standard protocols and into the territory of everyone figuring it out in real time. Jasmine's color was coming back slowly, incompletely, but coming back. Elliot remained in the aisle, seated on the armrest of 3D, close enough to act if needed, far enough back to give the family space. He was watching Jasmine's breathing, with the trained attention of someone who has spent years reading exactly that kind of information from exactly that kind of face. He had been watching Robert too, not with anger, exactly with something more clinical. He had treated men like Robert. He had been in rooms with men like Robert. He knew what the posture meant, and what the silence after the posture meant, and what came next. Usually he had opinions about all of it that he was keeping very carefully to himself right now, because there was a 14-year-old girl who needed every available unit of attention to be directed at her. But he was watching. 4 hours and 8 minutes to Los Angeles. The plane flew on, and below it, the land was enormous and indifferent and continuous, and above it, there was only sky. And in seat 3B, Jasmine Carter kept breathing, kept holding on, kept doing what she had always done, what her mother had taught her to do, what she had learned to do in waiting rooms and hospital corridors, and all the long, difficult places that her 14 years had taken her. She held her chin up. 4 hours and 8 minutes to Los Angeles. That number sat in Carmen's head like a stone in still water. She had been a flight attendant for 9 years. She had handled turbulence, crying babies, drunk businessmen, medical scares, emergency landings. She had trained for all of it. But standing in that aisle, looking at Jasmine Carter's pale face and listening to Robert Calloway breathe through his nose like a man who believed his inconvenience was the most important thing happening on this aircraft, she felt something she almost never felt at 37,000 feet. She felt genuinely afraid of what the next 4 hours were going to look like. Elliot was still positioned on the armrest of 3D, one hand, resting lightly near Jasmine's wrist, not touching, just close enough to feel the pulse change if it changed. His eyes moved between the girl and the monitor readout from the portable oxygen unit Carmen had retrieved from the forward medical kit. The numbers were not good, but they were not catastrophic either. They were in that uncomfortable middle territory that doctors know well, the place where you cannot relax, but you cannot yet act with the urgency of a true emergency. So you simply hold, you wait, you watch. Her pressure is low, he said to Denise, keeping his voice even. Not dangerously, but we need to keep her still and keep her calm. Any elevation in stress is going to make this harder for her body to manage. Denise nodded. She understood. She looked at Jasmine, who had her eyes open now, staring at the ceiling of the cabin with an expression that was somehow both exhausted and determined at the same time. "Baby," Denise said softly. "You hear Dr. Marsh? Still and calm." "I know what still and calm means, Mom," Jasmine said. Her voice was thin, but dry, almost wry, like a spark from a fire that was burning low but had not gone out. Elliot almost smiled. Almost. "She's got a good spirit," he said quietly to Denise. "She always has," Denise said, and then, from seat 3C, Robert Calloway shifted loudly, deliberately. The kind of shift a person makes when they want everyone in the immediate vicinity to know that they are shifting. Elliot looked up. Denise looked straight ahead. Carmen, who was standing in the aisle gathering the medical kit components, said nothing, but her hand tightened around the handle of the case, just slightly. Robert looked at Carmen. "How much longer is this going to be taking up the entire aisle?" The question dropped into the air like something rotten. Carmen turned to face him. She was careful. She was composed. But something had changed in her face. A subtle hardening, like something that had been soft, deciding it was done, being soft. "Sir," she said, "we're managing a medical situation. I need you to be patient." "I've been patient," Robert said. "For going on 40 minutes, I've been patient. I have a connecting meeting in Los Angeles. I have, sir. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. I am asking you clearly and directly to stop. Robert stared at her. Nobody told Robert Calloway to stop. Not in boardrooms, not in restaurants, not in first-class cabins at 37,000 feet. The expression that crossed his face was that of a man recalibrating. Not backing down exactly, but calculating how far he was willing to push in front of an audience that had grown measurably less sympathetic to him in the last hour. He sat back. He looked out the window. The man in 4A, Marcus, mid-40s, construction company owner from Queens, who had upgraded his ticket on a whim that morning, had been watching all of this without saying a word. He had a wide face and the kind of stillness that comes from having spent years on job sites where you learn very quickly to read the temperature of a room before you open your mouth. He leaned forward now, just slightly, and looked across the aisle at Robert. He didn't say anything. He just looked. Robert felt it. He turned. He met Marcus's eyes. Marcus held the look for exactly 3 seconds. Then he leaned back and returned to whatever he had been doing. But the message had been delivered, received, logged. The next 20 minutes passed in a fragile kind of quiet. Elliot monitored Jasmine. Carmen made 2 more trips to the medical kit. Denise sat with her hand wrapped around her daughter's and did not let go. The low hum of the aircraft continued under everything. That constant, almost meditative vibration that after a while you stop hearing and start just feeling in your chest. Jasmine slept not deeply, more like the thin, restless sleep of someone whose body is working hard, even at rest. But she slept, and that was something. And then the intercom clicked. The captain's voice came through. Measured pilot calm, the way it always is, which means it is impossible to tell from tone alone whether what follows is routine or not. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Hayes. I want to update you on our current situation. We are in contact with ground medical personnel regarding one of our passengers and are following their guidance. I want to assure everyone that we have an experienced physician on board who is providing direct care. We will be reassessing our flight path shortly and will keep you informed of any changes. Please keep your seatbelts fastened. The intercom clicked off. The word reassessing moved through the cabin like a current. The woman in 2C who had been pretending to read for the last 20 minutes looked up. The couple in 1A and 1B exchanged a look. Marcus in 4A sat forward again. Even the man in 5C, who had barely acknowledged anything happening outside his noise-canceling headphones, slowly reached up and removed them. Reassessing the flight path meant diversion. Everyone on that plane understood that, even the ones who had never flown before. Reassessing the flight path meant the captain was considering landing somewhere other than Los Angeles. It meant time was a factor. It meant the situation in row 3 was not merely an inconvenience or a manageable nuisance. It meant this was serious. Robert Calloway understood it too, and the understanding moved across his face in a way that was almost interesting to watch. If you were watching a series of micro-expressions, each one revealing something each one quickly covered. Surprise, calculation, something that might have been the very beginning of guilt, though it did not stay long enough to fully form. He flagged Carmen again. "They're talking about diverting the flight," he asked. "The captain is assessing options," Carmen said. "Because of her." Carmen looked at him for a moment. "Because of the medical situation." "Yes, sir." "This is..." He stopped himself. Started again. "I want to speak with the captain." "The captain is managing the aircraft, sir. He's not available." "Then, I want to speak with whoever is in charge of this cabin." Carmen straightened. "That would be me, sir." He stared at her. She stared back. Neither of them blinked. "Then I am telling you," Robert said, and his voice had dropped, now gone low and hard, "that diverting this flight is going to cost the airline an enormous amount of money and inconvenience every other passenger on board. And I think that before we start throwing the entire flight plan out the window, someone ought to consider whether the appropriate thing is not to in fact remove this passenger to the rear of the aircraft where she's not going anywhere." The voice was not Carmen's. It was Elliot's. He had not raised it, but he had aimed it with absolute precision. He was looking at Robert from his position near 3D, and the medical journal had been gone for over an hour now, and the mild, distracted quality he had carried when he boarded had been replaced by something else entirely. The calm, particular authority of a person who knows exactly what they are doing and exactly what is at stake. She has low blood pressure, elevated heart rate, and episodic abdominal pain that is consistent with a condition that is going to be made significantly worse by movement and stress. Moving her to the back of this plane is not a therapeutic option. It is the opposite of a therapeutic option. And if something happens to her, because we moved her, because someone found her presence inconvenient, he let that sentence stop where it stopped, which was enough. Robert's jaw tightened. "I'm not a doctor." "No," Elliot agreed. "You're not." 3 passengers in the rows behind them actually heard this exchange clearly. One of them, a retired school teacher named Gloria, from Baltimore. Seat 5, a window. Reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, put her book down slowly and deliberately and looked at the back of Robert Calloway's head. She had taught high school for 31 years. She had seen exactly his type walk through her classroom wearing it like a coat, that particular combination of privilege and incuriosity about its effect on other people. She had spent 31 years finding diplomatic ways to address it. Right now, she did not feel particularly diplomatic. She said nothing, but she took her glasses off her nose and let them hang on the chain the way you do when you are setting something down, because you are preparing to fully engage with what is in front of you. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence. Nothing severe, a rolling shutter, a few degrees of tilt, the overhead bins rattling briefly, but it was enough to make Jasmine's eyes open. "Easy," Elliot said immediately. "I'm okay," she said. She said it the same way she had said it the first time, after Robert had kicked her, like it was a thing she had trained herself to say, a reflex as automatic as pulling your hand back from a hot stove. Denise looked at her daughter's face. "How's the pain?" "Same." "Same bad?" or "Same, less bad?" "Just same." Denise nodded. She rubbed small circles on the back of Jasmine's hand. The gesture was so practiced, so automatic, that it was clear it had been going on for a long time, months, probably years maybe. The private language of a mother and a sick child who have learned to communicate in touch when words run out. Carmen appeared beside Elliot. She had her radio in her hand, and her voice was quieter than usual when she spoke to him. "Ground Medical is recommending we consider diversion to Denver. Captain wants your read." Elliot was quiet for a moment. He looked at Jasmine. He looked at the numbers on the portable monitor. He did the calculation, not slowly, but with the focused precision of someone who has made harder calls than this, in louder rooms than this. How long to Denver from current position? 42 minutes. How long to continue to LA? 4 hours, 2 minutes. He looked at Jasmine again. She was watching him. She had heard the exchange. Of course she had. She was 14, not 4. "Denver," she said before he could answer. Jasmine, Denise began. "Mom?" Jasmine turned her head on the headrest to look at her mother. "I heard Denver is 42 minutes. LA is 4 more hours. That's just math." She paused. "Tell them Denver." Denise's face did something complicated. She looked at Elliot. Elliot looked at Carmen. "Denver," he said. Carmen raised her radio. The captain's voice came over the PA system 2 minutes later. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be making an unscheduled landing in Denver, Colorado, to ensure that one of our passengers receives appropriate medical care. Our new estimated landing time is approximately 45 minutes. I apologize for the inconvenience and want to assure you that the safety and well-being of our passengers is our highest priority. Ground crews in Denver have been notified and will be ready upon our arrival. We'll have further information for connecting flights as soon as we land." The word inconvenience hit Robert Calloway somewhere specific. He turned in his seat, facing forward again, then turning back. He was moving the way people move when they are in an argument with themselves, and one side is losing. His foot tapped once against the floor. His jaw worked. "Marcus, from 4A, said it before anyone else could. Denver, he said not to anyone in particular. Just said it out loud into the air of the cabin, the way you say a word when you are calculating the cost of it and deciding whether you are okay with paying. Denver, Gloria echoed from 5A, dryly emphatically. Robert said nothing. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted into something that was no longer ambiguous. Whatever sympathy or benefit of the doubt had been available to him in the first 40 minutes of this flight had been quietly and collectively withdrawn. Not with confrontation, not with raised voices or pointed accusations, just withdrawn. The way light leaves the room when the sun moves behind clouds gradually, completely, without announcing itself. He felt it. It was impossible not to feel it. He was a man who had lived his entire life in rooms where his comfort was the dominant consideration, and the experience of sitting in a room where it was not, where it was. In fact, the thing everyone else was quietly holding in contempt was new to him. Or not new perhaps, but newly inescapable. Jasmine's eyes were closed again. Her breathing was steadier. Not good, but steadier. Elliot had not moved from his position, and Carmen had brought him water and a fresh pair of gloves from the kit, and the two of them had settled into the working rhythm of people who are managing something together and have stopped needing to narrate every step. Denise had not let go of her daughter's hand. She had also not looked at Robert Calloway in the last 20 minutes, not because she was afraid of him, not because she was done being angry, but because she had made a decision in that quiet way that certain women make decisions without announcement, without drama, that he did not deserve her eyes, that her eyes were better spent on the person who deserved them most. She looked at Jasmine, and Jasmine, as if sensing it even through the thin veil of half-leap, turned slightly toward her mother, and that was enough. It was then that Gloria from 5A reached forward and touched Denise on the shoulder. Denise turned. Gloria said nothing. She just looked at her, and then she gave a single slow nod. The kind of nod that is not about words, the kind that says, I see you, I see her, I see all of it. Denise held the older woman's gaze for a moment. Then she nodded back. Robert saw this exchange. Something moved across his face. Something that was not irritation and was not calculation, and was not the performance of concern he had been deploying since he sat down. Something smaller, something that looked for just a moment like a man catching a reflection of himself and not entirely recognizing what he sees. He looked away quickly. The plane banked. The slight angle of descent had begun imperceptible to most, but Elliot felt it, and Carmen felt it, and Jasmine, whose body had become hypersensitive to every change in pressure and motion over the past months, felt it too. Are we going down? She asked. We're starting our approach to Denver, Elliot told her. You're going to feel the plane descend. That's normal. That's supposed to happen. Will there be an ambulance? There will be an ambulance. She was quiet for a moment. Then Mom's going to have to cancel the appointment in L.A. Jasmine, the specialist, she made that appointment 4 months ago. She had to call 3 times to get it. Her voice was not distressed. It was simply factual. That was the other thing about Jasmine, the thing that Elliot had been observing, and that was making him feel something he rarely felt in clinical settings. She had this quality of seeing things clearly, without flinching, without the softening that most people apply to hard realities to make them livable. She just looked at them straight on. We'll reschedule, Denise said. But the wait, Jasmine. Denise's voice was still gentle, but it carried the full weight of a mother who has decided this conversation is over. We will reschedule. That is not a thing you need to carry right now. You hear me? Jasmine was quiet then. Okay. Okay, Denise repeated. Robert Calloway had heard every word. He was still facing forward. His drink sat untouched on the tray table. His phone was face down. The designer jacket that had looked so effortlessly polished when he boarded seemed now like something he was wearing wrong, too tight across the shoulders. Or maybe that was just the way sitting in his own silence fit him now. Not well. He cleared his throat. Elliot glanced at him, purely reflexive, the way you glance at a sound. Robert did not say anything for a long moment. Then, without turning, without addressing anyone directly, He said, "How old did you say she was?" Nobody answered him at first. Then Denise said flat and clear, 14. Another silence. 14. Robert repeated, like he was hearing the number for the first time, though he had known it from the moment he sat down, like he was running it through something inside himself and not entirely liking what came out the other side. Marcus, in 4A, let out a long, slow breath through his nose. Gloria, in 5A, closed her eyes. Carmen in the aisle looked at the floor for exactly 2 seconds and then looked back up and kept her face professional. And Elliot Marsh, who had seen a great many things in his years of practicing medicine, who had sat with grief and shock and crisis in rooms that smelled like antiseptic, and hope in roughly equal measure, simply watched Robert Calloway's profile and waited. He was waiting for something. He was not certain yet whether it would come. The plane continued its descent. Denver was growing beneath them, invisible through the clouds, but absolutely real and approaching fast. The medical team would be there. The ambulance would be there. Whatever came next would begin the moment those wheels touched down. But first, there were 37 minutes left. 37 minutes in this capsule, this strange temporary world of recycled air, and too close proximity, where everything that had been said and not said still hung in the space between the rows like weather. Jasmine's pulse held steady under Elliot's monitoring. Her breathing had lost the ragged quality it had carried at the worst of the episode and settled into something more controlled, more even. She was fighting quietly, without theater, without anyone telling her how brave she was or how strong. She was simply fighting the way she always did, the way she had apparently always done. And in the row beside her, Robert Calloway sat, with his untouched drink and his polished shoes, and the single word, 14, still turning over somewhere inside him. The descent continued, and nobody in that cabin said a word. 37 minutes became 30, became 25. The descent was steady, and the cabin was quiet in the way that a room full of people who are all thinking the same thing, but not saying it, tends to get quiet, thick with everything unspoken. Heavy, in a way that has nothing to do with altitude. Carmen had made 2 more passes through the first-class cabin, checking seatbelts, collecting cups, doing the work. But the work was different now. Her movements were tighter, more deliberate. She'd been a flight attendant for 9 years, and she had learned early that the cabin has a mood the way a living thing has a mood, and right now, this cabin's mood was something she did not have a clean word for. It was not panic. It was not chaos. It was something slower and more complicated than that. Something that had been building since the moment Robert Calloway's foot connected with Jasmine Carter's leg and had not stopped building since. Elliot had shifted from the armrest to the empty jump seat that Carmen had unlocked for him near the forward galley, close enough to respond if Jasmine needed him, but giving the family a narrow margin of privacy. He sat with the portable monitor across his knees, watching numbers. His face was still, his hands were still, but his mind was anything but. He had been running the same calculation over and over for the past 20 minutes. The one that doctors learn to run and never fully stop running. What do I know? What don't I know? What's the most likely scenario? What's the worst one? And what is in my control right now? The first 3 he could work with. The 4th he was managing. The 5th was the one that kept snagging. Because what was in his control right now was very limited. He had no imaging equipment. He had no lab work. He had a portable blood pressure cuff, a pulse oximeter, a basic medical kit, and his own experience, which was considerable, but was not a hospital. And Jasmine needed a hospital. 23 minutes to Denver. Jasmine had been quiet for a while, not asleep. Her eyes were open, fixed on some middle distance above the seat in front of her. Denise sat beside her, and the 2 of them had settled into a silence that was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of people who know each other well enough not to fill every moment. Then Jasmine said, "Dr. Marsh." Elliot looked up. "Yeah. Are you scared?" The question was direct, no preamble. 14 years old, and she asked it like she deserved a real answer, which she did. Elliot held her gaze for a moment. "I'm focused," he said. "There's a difference." She considered this. "Is that what you tell your patients?" "It's what I tell myself. The patients usually don't ask." "I'm asking." "I know you are." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. "Here's the truth, Jasmine. You are not in the worst shape I've seen. Not even close. I've worked trauma. I've sat with people in situations that were genuinely unsurvivable and watched them fight anyway. You're fighting. Your body is handling this. My job is to make sure we get you to people who have the tools I don't have. And we're 23 minutes from that. So no, I'm not scared. I'm counting down." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Okay." "Okay," he said back. From the seat beside her, Denise exhaled slow and long and barely audible. But Elliot heard it. He caught her eye for just a moment over Jasmine's head, and something passed between them in that look. The particular understanding between two adults who are both working to remain strong in front of a child who is watching everything and deserves not to be frightened more than she already is. Robert Calloway had also heard the exchange. He was turned slightly now, not fully facing them, but no longer fully turned away either. Something had shifted in his posture in the last 20 minutes. The aggressive proprietary tension that had defined him since he sat down had loosened, not disappeared, not transformed into anything generous, but loosened like a fist that has been clenched so long it has started to cramp and had to, despite itself, open a fraction. He picked up his scotch, put it down again without drinking. The ice had melted. The glass was just cold water, and amber, now the color of something expensive that had stopped being what it was. Marcus, from 4A, had been watching Robert the way you watch weather. Patiently, without expectation, 21 minutes to Denver. The turbulence came back, not the gentle rolling pocket from earlier. This was sharper. A sudden drop, maybe 4 seconds of it, the kind that makes your stomach go ahead of you, that makes overhead bins rattle and liquid slush, and people grab armrests without deciding to grab them. Carmen was in the aisle, and she grabbed the headrest of the nearest seat and held professional upright, doing exactly what her training said to do. Jasmine made a sound. It was small, but it was there, a short intake of breath, a tightening. Her hand, which had been resting flat on her thigh, closed into a fist. "I've got you," Denise said, and her arm was around her daughter's shoulders before the turbulence had even fully passed. "I'm okay," Jasmine said. The reflex, always the reflex. But Elliot was already up, already moving back to her row. He checked the monitor. Her pulse had spiked. Not severely, but enough to note. Enough to write down in the running log he had been maintaining in his head since he first crouched beside her. "Deep breath," he said, "right now with me. In through the nose." She did it. Hold. 2, 3. Now out through the mouth. She did it again. They did it 3 more times, and by the end, her pulse had come back down to something closer to where it had been. Not good, but manageable. The distinction between those two things had become the central axis of this entire flight. The turbulence passed. Carmen, still holding the headrest, let go. She straightened her jacket with a single precise movement and looked at Elliot, who gave her a small nod. She gave one back. From seat 5, Gloria had both hands pressed flat on her armrests, and her eyes were closed. Not from fear of turbulence. This woman had flown more times than most people eat breakfast. She had her eyes closed because she was doing something private, praying maybe, or the secular equivalent of it, which is the desperate focusing of all of one's hope onto a single point. She opened her eyes and looked at Jasmine. Jasmine, whose face was still turned toward the ceiling, was breathing steadily, in and out. Gloria said quietly, more to herself than anyone, "That's it, sweetheart. Keep going." Robert heard it. He turned toward 5A involuntarily. The way you turn toward a sound when you weren't expecting it. He looked at Gloria. Gloria was not looking at him. She was looking at Jasmine with an expression of such unguarded, straightforward love, The kind of love older women sometimes aim at children who are not theirs because they have enough of it that it spills over, that it cannot be contained to just the family they were given. That Robert looked away again. His jaw worked. 18 minutes to Denver. The captain's voice returned. Flight crew, please prepare the cabin for landing. We're beginning our final approach into Denver International. Medical personnel have been notified and will be on the ground. Please ensure all tray tables are stowed and seats are in the upright position. The ordinary words of landing preparation applied to a situation that was not ordinary at all. Carmen moved efficiently through the cabin tray, table seatbacks, the careful choreography of descent. She reached row 3 last. She looked at Denise. I need to ask you to bring your seat forward, but I want you to know that Dr. Marsh and I are going to stay right here through the landing. We're not going anywhere. Denise nodded. She reached back and brought the seat upright without letting go of Jasmine's hand. Carmen looked at Robert. Sir, tray table and seat upright, please. Robert complied without a word. Carmen lingered for just half a second longer than the job required. Then she moved on. It was Marcus who spoke next. He had not said much. He was not a man who spoke to fill space. But he leaned across the aisle now and said to no one in particular. The way you say something when you want it to be heard, but don't want to make a performance of it. Little girl's got more guts than most people I've ever met. Nobody disputed this. Robert did not respond, but something in his shoulders moved. A microfracture in the architecture of his stillness. 15 minutes to Denver. And then Jasmine said something that nobody was prepared for. She turned her head slowly, and she looked directly at Robert Calloway. She had not looked at him since the kick. She had been looking away, looking up, looking at her mother, looking at Elliot. But now she looked at him, and she looked at him the way she had looked at hard things all her life, straight on, without flinching, without softening. Robert became aware of it. He turned. They looked at each other. 14 years old against mid-40s, sick, against comfortable. A child who had spent the last year learning what her body could and could not do, against a man who had spent his entire life being told that what his body wanted was the most important thing in the room. Jasmine said, "Why did you kick me?" The cabin did not go silent because it was already silent. But the quality of the silence changed. It became something with weight. Robert stared at her. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. "I'm not asking to fight," Jasmine said. Her voice was thin, still slightly breathless, but clear. "I'm just asking. I want to understand why." Denise's hand tightened around hers, not pulling her back. Just there. Robert's mouth opened again. He stopped. "I was frustrated. With me, he stopped again. The sentence had nowhere good to go, and he knew it. He looked for the first time since he boarded this plane like a man who was not entirely sure where to put himself. "I wasn't bothering you," Jasmine said. "I was just sitting there." The silence stretched. "I know," Robert said. And the two words came out differently from everything else he had said, quieter, stripped of the performance. Just two words sitting there in the air, between them unadorned and uncomfortably honest. Jasmine looked at him for another moment. Then she turned back toward the ceiling. She had gotten what she came for. Not an apology, not yet. Maybe not ever. And she seemed to have decided she was fine either way. She had gotten the truth, which was a smaller thing than justice, but sometimes all you have. Elliot had watched this exchange without moving. He realized somewhere during it that he had been holding his breath. He let it out. Marcus, in 4A, leaned back in his seat. He covered his mouth briefly with one hand, the way you do when something hits you and you are not in a place where you can fully respond to it. Then he put his hand down. Gloria, in 5A, did not bother hiding it. Her eyes were bright. She did not let the tears fall, but she did not pretend they were not there either. She was a woman of 71 years who had seen a great deal of the world and had learned long ago that grace and grief often show up at the same time. 12 minutes to Denver, the plane banked gently into its final approach angle. Outside the windows, which nobody in the first-class cabin was looking at, because there was so much more to look at inside it, the land was coming up. Denver was below them, growing real. Elliot checked Jasmine's numbers one more time. Her pressure was still low. Her pulse was elevated, but not critically. She was pale and tired and in pain. But she was present. She was coherent. She was fighting. "Jasmine," he said, "we're 12 minutes out. When we land, there's going to be some movement. Paramedics coming on board a stretcher, some equipment. It's going to feel busy and fast. I want you to be ready for that." "Will it hurt?" she asked, not afraid, just wanting to know. "Moving, you might be uncomfortable. I'm going to be honest about that." "Okay," she processed it. "Will you be there when they come on?" "I'll be right there." "Okay," she said again, and she closed her eyes. 10 minutes. Robert Calloway had not moved, had not spoken since the 2 words he had offered to Jasmine, which had cost him something. You could see it on his face, the cost of them, the unfamiliar expenditure of honesty. He was looking at his hands now, which were flat on his thighs, and there was something in the way he was looking at them that suggested he was not actually seeing them. He was looking at something else, something internal, something that did not have a clear shape yet. Brenda, the senior flight attendant from the rear cabin, had come forward and was standing near the galley, speaking in low tones with Carmen. They had been coordinating the ground arrival, who would meet them at the gate, what order the passengers would deplane, how to manage the medical handoff, without creating a bottleneck in the aisle logistics, the practical architecture of getting through the next 20 minutes as cleanly as possible. But Brenda, who was 62 years old and had worked this job for 30 years, and had seen more in airplane cabins than most people see in lifetimes, kept glancing at row 3. Kept glancing at that girl, and at the man beside her. She leaned toward Carmen, said quietly, "Has he said anything?" "Actually said anything?" Carmen's expression answered before her words did. 2 words. Brenda looked at Robert, then back at Carmen. "You know they're going to want a report. I know the kick, the request to move her, the all of it. I know Brenda. Airline legal is going to want. I know." Carmen's voice was steady, but there was something under it now. Something tired. "I've been logging everything since it started. Every word, every time." Brenda nodded slowly. "Good girl. 7 minutes." The seatbelt sign was on. The descent had steepened slightly. The familiar pressure changes of final approach had begun. The subtle equalization that your body registers before your brain does. Jasmine felt it. "Are we almost there, almost?" Elliot said. "Is my mom still there?" "Right here," Denise said, immediately squeezing her hand. "Right here, baby." Jasmine opened her eyes. She looked at her mother, and then she said something very quiet, something that was meant only for Denise, but in the compressed intimacy of that cabin reached further than intended. "I'm sorry you had to cancel L.A. We are not doing this," Denise said firmly. Jasmine Marie Carter." Denise's voice had that particular register, the full name, the measured weight of each syllable that every child raised by a loving but serious mother recognizes as the absolute end of a debate. "You are 14 years old. You are sick and you are scared, and you are the bravest person I have ever known in my entire life. You do not apologize to me. Not today. Not for this. Not ever." Jasmine's eyes filled. She had been holding back a great deal for a long time. The pain, the fear, the exhaustion of being sick, and being made to feel like an inconvenience, and being asked to stay calm through all of it, it had been sitting in her chest like something that needed out. And her mother's voice, that particular voice in that particular tone, opened the door. She cried quietly without drama. Just tears running down her face, and her mother's arm around her, and the sound of the plane descending toward a city she had never planned to visit on a day she had not planned for. Marcus, in 4A, looked out the window and said nothing, and blinked several times in a row. Gloria, in 5A, reached into her purse and found a travel pack of tissues and held them out toward Denise across the aisle without saying a word. Denise took them, nodded. Gloria nodded back. Robert Calloway watched his daughter cry. He did not think of it that way. She was not his daughter. He had never seen her before today. He would likely never see her again. but in the way that certain moments dismantle the categories we use to separate ourselves from other people. He watched her cry, and something inside him cracked open in a way that was not comfortable and was not small. His eyes moved to Denise. Denise was not looking at him. She was entirely focused on Jasmine, speaking low and steady into her daughter's hair, saying things he could not make out, things that were not meant for him. He looked at his hands again. 5 minutes to Denver. The ground was close. The engines had changed their pitch. That particular descending tone that means you are almost there. That the long suspension is almost over. The wheels would come down soon. The runway would come up to meet them. The ambulance would be there, and the paramedics, and the beginning of whatever came next for Jasmine Carter and her mother. Robert cleared his throat. It was a small sound, but Elliot looked up. Carmen looked up. Marcus looked over. Robert was looking at Jasmine. She had stopped crying. She was still leaning into her mother, but her face had calmed and she was breathing steadily, and her eyes were open and clear despite everything. He said her name, Jasmine. She looked at him, the same direct, unguarded look she had given him before. Robert Calloway, who had walked through the world for 46 years, as though it owed him its best available seat, opened his mouth and said, "I'm sorry." 3 words unadorned, no explanation attached, no qualification, no hedge. Just 3 words, and the way they came out slowly, like something being carried carefully downstairs, because it is heavy and fragile, made it clear that they had cost him something real. The cabin held the moment. Jasmine looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "I know." Not "I forgive you." Not "it's okay." Not any of the things we are trained from childhood to say when an adult apologies to us. The reflexive absolutions that let everyone off the hook too easily. Just "I know." 2 words that were simultaneously kinder and more truthful than any of the alternatives. Elliot exhaled. Marcus looked at the ceiling. Gloria pressed both hands flat to her chest, over her hard eyes closed, like someone receiving news they had been waiting a long time to hear. The wheels came down with a solid mechanical funk, the landing gear deploying, locking into place, the plane committing now to the ground that was rushing up to meet it. And Jasmine Carter, 14 years old, sick and tired, and braver than anyone on that plane had any right to expect, turned her face back toward the window and watched Denver arrive. 2 minutes, 1, the wheels touched. The wheels hit the runway hard, and the whole plane shuddered with the kind of full-body jolt that reminds you after hours of smooth cruising that you are in a machine, and machines are subject to physics, and physics does not care about your comfort. The engines reversed with a roar that pressed everyone back into their seats, and Denver International came up fast outside the windows. The tarmac, the lights, the emergency vehicles already visible and moving into position along the taxiway. Jasmine felt the landing in her abdomen like a second fist. She made no sound. She had used up her sounds. She simply pressed her lips together and held on. And Denise held on with her. And the plane decelerated, and the roar softened, and they were down. They were on the ground. The long suspension was over. Elliot was already standing, already checking her pulse the moment the deceleration eased enough to move safely. His face was focused and fast. "Jasmine, talk to me. Scale of 1 to 10 right now." 7, she said, honest, not performing strengths she didn't have. "Okay, that's okay. The paramedics are going to be on board in under 4 minutes. I need you to stay still. Do not try to get up. Do not try to help anyone move you. Your only job is to breathe." She nodded. "Say it back to me. Breathe." She said, "Good." Carmen was already on the radio coordinating with the ground crew, her voice clipped and precise. Brenda had positioned herself at the forward cabin door, one hand on the release waiting for the signal. The other passengers in first class had gone very still. Not the polite stillness of people minding their own business, but the electric stillness of people who are part of something and know it. Marcus had his hand on the armrest of 4A leaning forward. His face was a locked door with a lot of noise behind it. Gloria had both hands folded in her lap and was watching Jasmine with the steady, focused attention of a woman who has decided that the most useful thing she can do right now is witness this properly. To see it, to hold it, to not look away. Robert Calloway had not moved. He was sitting in 3C with his hands on his thighs and his eyes on the middle distance. And the apology he had given 3 minutes ago was still sitting in the air around him, still settling, still finding its place. He looked like a man in the early disorienting stages of a reckoning with himself. Not finished, not resolved, just beginning, which was something, which was not nothing. The plane came to a full stop. Carmen's radio crackled. She said something fast and affirmative. Then she looked at Brenda. "They're ready." Brenda pulled the door. The Denver air came in cold and thin at altitude. The particular clarity of a mile-high city in the middle of the country, and with it came the sound of the ground. Real sound. Not the recycled, pressurized audio of cabin air, the sound of tarmac and wind, and the low rumble of emergency vehicles idling nearby. And then the paramedics were on board. There were 3 of them, 2 men and a woman, all in their 30s, moving with the compressed urgency of people who have done this many times but never treated as routine. They had a stretcher and a portable kit, and the particular focused calm of emergency medical professionals, which is different from regular calm, is different from a campfire. The energy is the same, but the intention behind it is not. The lead paramedic, his name badge said Torres, went straight to Elliot. They spoke in rapid short orthand, the universal language of medical professionals transferring care. Vitals, timeline, medications, known conditions. The log that Elliot had been keeping in his head for the past 2 hours came out of him with the precision and completeness of a written report, because that was the kind of doctor he was. Torres nodded, turned to Jasmine. "Hi," he said, "just that. Simply not the performed cheerfulness that some emergency workers deploy with children, which always lands false. Just hi, person to person." "Hi," Jasmine said back. "I'm going to take good care of you. My name's Tortoise. Can I ask you some questions while my team gets set up?" "Sure. You're 14. "Yeah. Have you eaten today?" "Half a granola bar at the airport. Couldn't eat more." "That's okay. Any allergies to medications?" "Penicillin. Good to know. You're going to feel some movement in a minute. We're going to transfer you to the stretcher. I want you to let us do all the work. Don't push. Don't assist. Just go limp if you can." "Okay. You're doing great, Jasmine. That's what everyone keeps saying," she said quietly. And there was something in her voice. Not bitterness, not quite, but the exhaustion of a person who has been told they are doing great for so long that the phrase has started to feel like a kindness that is also a kind of pressure. Torres caught it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know what? You don't have to do great. You just have to hold on. That's the only requirement right now." She looked at him. Something shifted in her face. "Okay," she said, and this time it sounded different, lighter, like she had put something down. The transfer took 90 seconds. It was uncomfortable. She winced twice and made a sound, once short and involuntary. But Torres and his team moved with such synchronized efficiency that it was over before the discomfort had time to fully register. One moment, she was in seat 3B, where she had spent the last 2.5 hours. The next, she was on the stretcher with a blanket over her and a monitoring clip on her finger, and an oxygen mask being positioned over her face. Denise stood immediately and then stopped, hands out, not sure which way to move, the particular paralysis of a mother who has been the anchor for so long that suddenly being freed of the anchor feels like falling. Torres looked at her. "You're her mother." "Yes, you're coming with us. Stay close. Stay behind the stretcher. Do exactly what we ask. You'll be in the ambulance with her." Denise's entire body reorganized itself around those words. The paralysis dissolved. She picked up her bag from the overhead bin in one motion and was behind the stretcher before Torres had finished the sentence. It was then in the movement and the urgency and the organized chaos of the medical transfer that Elliot stepped back. He had done everything he could do in this capsule. His part, the in-flight part, was over. The people with the right tools had arrived, and he had the particular expression of someone who has just released something they were gripping very tightly. Relief mixed with the strange flat aftermath of sustained adrenaline. He looked at Jasmine as they moved her past him toward the door. She turned her head and found him. "Thank you," she said, muffled slightly by the oxygen mask, but clear enough. "You did the work," he said. "I just watched." She held his gaze for another second. Then she was past him, through the forward galley, through the open door, into the Denver air. Denise paused at the door just for 1 second. She turned back toward the cabin. Her eyes moved across the faces in front of her. Carmen, who held her gaze, and gave a small firm nod. Brenda, who pressed her hand briefly to her chest. Gloria in 5A, who had both hands up in something that was not quite a wave and not quite a prayer, and was maybe both at once. Marcus in 4A, who said nothing, but whose face said everything. And then her eyes went to Robert Calloway. He was looking at her directly. No performance of casualness, no looking away, just looking at her. And in his face was the particular blankness of a man who has used up his words and is sitting with what remains. Denise looked at him for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to let him know she saw him, long enough to let him sit in it. And then she turned and stepped through the door and was gone. The cabin held the absence of them. Carmen pulled the door closed. The Denver air cut off. The familiar pressurized quiet of the aircraft reasserted itself. But it was not the same quiet as before. It was a quieter quiet, emptier in a specific spot. The passengers who were going to miss connections would miss connections. The passengers who needed to reschedule would reschedule. These were real inconveniences, and nobody in that cabin was pretending otherwise. But the thing about a real inconvenience measured against what they had just witnessed was that it had a different weight. It sat differently on the scale. Marcus leaned back in his seat and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he said to no one in particular, "I hope that little girl is okay." Nobody responded, but nobody needed to. It was the same thing everyone was thinking. And saying it out loud just let it breathe. Carmen began the process of managing the delayed flight, communicating with the captain, coordinating with ground operations, speaking with passengers about connections and rebooking options. She was professional and efficient and present in the way she always was. But there was a quality to her movements now that was slightly different from the professional efficiency of the outbound leg. She was moving through this cabin with the conscious attention of someone who has just been reminded what the job is actually for. And Robert Calloway sat in 3C and did not move. He did not ask about rebooking, did not ask about his connection, did not flag anyone down. He sat with the empty seat beside him, the seat that Jasmine had occupied, and he looked at it. And then he looked at his phone, which he had picked up, and then put back down 3 times in the last 5 minutes. Elliot, returning to his seat in 3D, glanced at him once. Robert felt the glance and looked up. Their eyes met. Elliot said nothing. He just held the look for a moment. Not hostile, not warm, just even. The look of a man who sees another man clearly and has made no decision yet about what that clarity means. Robert said, "Is she going to be okay?" Elliot sat down. He considered the question the way he always considered questions from family members in waiting rooms. Honestly, without the false comfort that helps no one and the false despair that helps no one either. "I don't know," he said. "I'm not going to tell you yes, because it's easier. She's in good hands now. They have what they need, but I don't know what they're going to find when they get proper imaging." He paused. "She's strong. That I know for certain." Robert nodded, said nothing for a moment. Then, "I didn't know she was that sick." Elliot looked at him. Would it have changed anything if you had known the question was not cruel? It was genuine, clinical almost. The kind of question you ask not to wound someone, but because the answer actually matters. Robert was quiet for a long time, long enough that it became clear he was not going to answer it. Not because he was avoiding it, but because he was actually thinking about it, sitting with it, turning it over. That Elliot thought was something. Not enough, but something. Gloria from 5A had taken out a small notepad and a pen. She was writing something. Elliot noticed and looked away, respecting the privacy of whatever it was. It was a name. She was writing Jasmine's name, and below it the date, and below that, a sentence she would carry home to Baltimore, and eventually to the grandchildren she told stories to on Sunday evenings when the family gathered, and someone always asked her to tell them about something real that had happened in the world. She was writing it down so she would not forget the details when the time came to tell it. 20 minutes passed. The captain's voice returned. Ladies and gentlemen, we're cleared to continue to Los Angeles. We do want to thank you for your patience during this unscheduled stop. Flight time to Los Angeles from our current position is approximately 2 hours and 50 minutes. We'll be underway shortly. On behalf of myself and the entire crew, thank you. The engines began to build. Carmen moved through the first-class cabin one final time before takeoff, doing the check that she had done at the beginning that she would do again on the other side. The same physical ritual, rendered completely different by everything that had happened in between. Tray tables, seat backs, belts. She reached 3B, the empty seat. Jasmine's blanket was still there, the thin airline blanket that Denise had draped over her daughter's lap before any of this started. Carmen picked it up, folded it, held it for a moment, then she placed it carefully on top of the empty seat and moved on. The plane began to move. It taxied out slowly, the deliberate crawl of a heavy machine finding its way to the runway. The Denver tarmac passed outside the windows. The emergency vehicles that had come for Jasmine were already gone, back to wherever they came from. The ambulance on its way to the hospital. The whole mechanical apparatus of care already doing its next thing. Robert watched out the window as the spot where they had been disappeared behind the plane's movement. He picked up his phone again. This time he did not put it back down. He opened it. His thumbs hovered over the screen. He did not type anything yet, but he did not close the phone either. The runway appeared ahead. The captain's voice said, "Flight crew, prepare for takeoff." Carmen took her jump seat. Brenda took hers. And the engines went to full power, and the plane accelerated down the runway. And the ground dropped away for the second time that day, and Denver fell back behind them, and the sky opened up above them, wide and continuous and indifferent in the way the sky always is, which somehow makes what happens underneath it feel more important, not less. 3 minutes into the climb, Marcus leaned across the aisle, not toward Robert, toward the empty seat between them. 3B, as though addressing the space itself, but his voice was pitched to Carrie. Some people, he said without preamble, without naming anyone, spend their whole lives thinking they're the most important person in every room. He paused, and then something happens, and they find out they're not, and then they have a choice. They can just keep being who they were, or they can do something about it. He leaned back. He did not look at Robert. He was done. Gloria had stopped writing in her notepad. She was listening. Elliot, his eyes closed, and his head back against his seat, was also listening, despite all appearances. Robert Calloway held his phone in both hands. On the screen, he had opened a browser. He had typed the words into the search bar without entirely knowing he was going to do it. The words were, Children's Hospital Colorado donation. He stared at it for a long time. Then he pressed enter. Elliot heard the tap of the phone screen from the seat beside him. He did not open his eyes. He said nothing. He simply registered it and filed it in that part of his mind where he kept the things that weren't his to judge the things that belonged to people's own ongoing negotiations with themselves. But he noticed 2 hours and 47 minutes to Los Angeles. The plane leveled off. The seatbelt signs went dark. Carmen appeared from the galley with a service cart because the service had to continue. Because the flight had to continue. Because the ordinary mechanics of the world do not stop for even the most extraordinary things that happen inside them. She reached row 3 and paused. "Can I get you anything?" she asked. She was asking both of them. Elliot and Robert, the two men left in the row that had held so much. Elliot said, "Water, please. Thank you." Carmen looked at Robert. Robert looked up from his phone. He opened his mouth, closed it. Then he said, "Same, just water." And after a beat that had cost him something, he added, "Thank you." Carmen poured the water, set the cups down, moved on. It was such a small thing. "Thank you." 2 words. The same number of words as I know. The same number of words as I'm sorry. Small units of language carrying enormous cargo. The way language does when you are finally genuinely using it for what it was for. Gloria noted it from 5A. She added a sentence to her notepad. Marcus, in 4A, had his eyes closed now, but the line of his jaw was easier than it had been. The locked door of his face had unlocked slightly. Not because anything had been resolved. Nothing was fully resolved. Nothing ever was, but because some things had been said and some things had been done. And the girl was with doctors who had what they needed. And the plane was flying west, and the sky outside was that particular deep blue that you only see at altitude, clear and cold and very far from the ground. Somewhere over the mountains, Elliot opened his eyes. He looked at the empty seat in 3B, at the folded blanket Carmen had left there. He thought about Jasmine, the way she had asked him straight out if he was scared. The way she had said, "I know," instead of "I forgive you." The way she had told her mother, "Don't be mad," before she asked for anything for herself. The way she had held her chin up through every single minute of it. Not because she was performing strength for anyone, but because it was simply the only way she knew to move through the world. Hold your chin up. He was going to think about her for a long time. He knew that already. He was a doctor. He had met thousands of patients. Most of them blurred over time, not from callousness, but from the sheer volume of them, the way one face overlaps with the next until the individual edges soften. But some of them stayed. Some of them arrived so fully themselves, so completely and uncompromisingly present in the room, that they burned a shape into you that the years didn't touch. Jasmine Carter was going to be one of those. His phone buzzed. A text from his office, a rescheduling request, an appointment that had been waiting for him in L.A. The ordinary machinery of his ordinary life, picking up exactly where it had left off. Completely unaware of what had happened, between New York and here, he answered it. Set the phone down, looked out the window at the mountains below. Robert beside him had put his own phone away. He had completed whatever he was doing on it. The donation, if that's what it was, the search, the whatever it was. And now he sat with his hands in his lap, and the designer jacket that had seemed so entirely himself when he boarded, feeling like a costume he was now uncertain about. He turned to Elliot. "You said she's strong," he said. "I did. I mean, you've seen a lot of patients. You meant it. You weren't just saying it." Elliot turned and looked at him with the full direct attention of someone who takes the question seriously. "I've been a doctor for 23 years, he said. "I've sat with people who had everything in their favor and fell apart. And I've sat with people who had nothing in their favor and held on. The ones who hold on, they have a quality. It's hard to describe clinically, but you know it when you see it." He paused. "She has it." Robert nodded. He looked at his hands. "I have a daughter," he said. Elliot waited. "She's 11. Robert's voice had changed register entirely. Something had been removed from it. The performance, the armor, all of it. What was left was just a man's voice. She gets sick sometimes. Nothing serious. But when she does, He stopped. "I don't know why I'm telling you this." "Because you need to say it," Elliot said simply. Robert was quiet for a moment. "Then I was already in a bad mood when I boarded. The flight before this had been delayed. I had a meeting. I was just..." He made a short, frustrated sound that was aimed entirely at himself. "None of that matters." "No," Elliot agreed. "It doesn't." "I know." Robert looked at the empty seat. "I know. 2 hours and 19 minutes to Los Angeles." The drink cart came around again. Neither of them ordered anything. The miles passed under them in silence that was not comfortable exactly, but was no longer hostile. It was the silence of two people who have arrived somewhere they did not expect to arrive and are still figuring out the coordinates. And in Denver, in a hospital whose name Robert had typed into a search bar 30,000 feet in the air, Jasmine Carter was being seen by doctors who had imaging equipment and lab work and all the tools that Elliot had not had. Her mother was beside her hand, wrapped around hers, exactly the way it had been on the plane. The same gesture, the same grip, the same two people still holding on. 2 hours and 19 minutes became 2 hours. became 90 minutes, became an hour. The plane moved west, the way time moves when you are waiting for news. Not fast enough, never fast enough, but relentlessly forward, regardless. Elliot had not slept. He had tried briefly in the way that people try to sleep when their body needs it, but their mind has not gotten the memo. He had closed his eyes and stayed behind them for maybe 15 minutes, not resting exactly, more like standing in a hallway between one room and the next. Then he had given up and opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling of the cabin and thought about Jasmine. He thought about her pulse under his fingers, the specific quality of it, thready, elevated, working too hard. He thought about her blood pressure numbers and what they suggested and what they might mean when someone with proper equipment got a proper look. He ran through possibilities the way he always ran through possibilities, not catastrophizing, not reassuring himself falsely, just mapping the territory honestly. Some of the maps were good, some of them were not. He did not know which map was the right one. That was the part that stayed with him, lodged in his chest, like something undigested. Robert had been quiet for the last hour and 15 minutes. Not the aggressive quiet of someone performing patience they do not feel, but genuinely quiet. The quiet of someone who has gone somewhere internal and is doing real work there. He had looked at his phone twice. Both times, he had put it away without doing anything on it. Whatever he had needed to do earlier, the search, the donation page, the whatever it was done. Now he was just sitting with himself, which was clearly not a thing he did often, and which was clearly not comfortable. That was fine. Elliot had no interest in making it comfortable for him. But he was watching the way he always watched, with the clinical detachment that was not really detachment at all, but a very trained way of caring from a distance. Marcus had fallen asleep in 4A. Actually genuinely asleep, his head tipped back and his big hands loose in his lap. The lines of his face had relaxed in sleep into something younger than his waking expression, and the locked door quality was gone. And what remained was just a tired man who had spent the better part of this flight feeling things he hadn't expected to feel when he boarded. Gloria was awake. She had finished writing in her notepad and closed it, and was sitting with it in her lap, both hands resting on top of it. She was looking out the window, or seemed to be, but every few minutes her eyes moved back to the empty seat in 3B, the folded blanket, the space where Jasmine had been. 45 minutes to Los Angeles. Carmen came through one more time. She stopped at Elliot's row and crouched slightly so she was level with him. And she said, low and direct, I wanted you to know I filed a full incident report. Everything from the initial request to relocate the passenger to the verbal exchanges to, she paused, to the physical contact. Elliot nodded. Good. The airline's protocol for something like this. There's going to be a review. Legal will be involved. The passengers who witnessed it may be contacted. She looked at him steadily. You're listed as a key witness. I know, he said. I'll cooperate fully. Carmen held his gaze for a moment. Then she glanced briefly at Robert, and back at Elliot. The mother was given my direct contact information before she left the plane. I told her to call me when she knows something. She paused. I don't usually do that. I know, Elliot said again. Softer this time. Carmen stood up, smoothed her jacket, moved on with the cart. Robert had heard everything. He did not turn around. He did not react visibly. But his jaw worked once, and his hands, which had been loose on his thighs, closed very slightly. Not a fist, just a closing. The body registering something that the mind was still processing, he said quietly, without turning. Will she press charges? Elliot looked at him. I don't know. What would you do if you were her? The question was genuine, not strategic, not a man calculating his exposure, a man who was actually asking which was different, and Elliot treated it as different. I would do whatever gave my daughter the most protection and the most dignity, Elliot said, and I would let her have some say in it, because she's earned it. Robert absorbed this. Then he said very quietly, she probably has earned it. She has, Elliot said, without question. 38 minutes to Los Angeles. And then Elliot's phone buzzed. He looked at it. The screen showed a number he did not recognize. A Denver area code. His pulse did something involuntary. He answered it before the second buzz finished. "This is Elliot Marsh." "Dr. Marsh." The voice was Denise's, controlled as always, but he could hear the texture underneath the control, the exhaustion and the relief and the fear all braided together. "This is Denise Carter. Carmen gave me your number. I hope that's okay." "More than okay," he said immediately. "How is she?" A pause. The kind of pause that has weight. "She's stable," Denise said. "They've got her on fluids and pain management. They ran imaging." Another pause longer. "They found something." Elliot sat forward. "What did they find?" "An obstruction partial in her small intestine. They said it's been building for weeks, possibly longer. That's what's been causing the episodes. The pain, all of it." Elliot closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. He was running through what that meant. Partial obstruction, treatable, requiring intervention? Yes, but treatable. The map had just clarified. And it was one of the better maps. "Is she going to need surgery?" he asked. "They don't know yet. They're monitoring tonight. If it doesn't resolve with the treatment they've started, then yes. But the doctor here, Dr. Reeves, she said that catching it when we did, the way we did, probably prevented it from becoming a full obstruction, which would have been..." Denise stopped. The sentence didn't need finishing. Both of them knew what a full obstruction at altitude meant. "She's going to be okay," Elliot said. Not a question. This time, not a performance of optimism, a real grounded, informed statement from a doctor who had just heard exactly what he needed to hear to say it. A long exhale from Denise's end, the sound of a woman who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time. Finally being told she can set it down. "Dr. Marsh," she said, and then she stopped. She tried again. "I don't..." Another stop. "I don't have words for what you did today, Denise." His voice was gentle, but firm. "Your daughter did it." I handed her water and counted her heartbeats. She did everything else herself. A silence then, from Denise's end, a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, but lived in the exact territory between them. "She wants me to tell you something," Denise said. Elliot waited. "She wants me to tell you that the answer to your question, the one you asked her on the plane, about whether I was scared, she says her answer was going to be yes. But she changed it because she didn't want you to be scared too." A beat. "She told me that just now. She said to tell you." Elliot pressed his free hand flat against his knee. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Tell her that's exactly the right reason." He ended the call. He sat very still for a moment, the phone in his hand, looking at nothing. Then he turned to Robert. Robert was already looking at him. His face was completely open in a way it had not been at any point on this flight. No performance, no armor, no calculation. Just a man sitting with both hands open on his thighs, waiting. "She's stable," Elliot said. "They found what was wrong. She's going to be okay." Robert closed his eyes. It was a brief thing, 3 seconds, maybe 4. But in those 3 seconds, something moved across his face that was entirely unguarded, entirely ungoverned, entirely real. Relief that had nowhere to hide. The kind of relief that only comes when you have been sitting with the possibility of the worst, and the worst has stepped back from the door. He opened his eyes. They were bright. He said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not be inadequate. He understood that. For perhaps the first time on this entire flight, Robert Calloway had arrived at the accurate assessment of his own limitations. From 4A, Marcus stirred. His eyes opened. He looked at Elliot with the particular alertness of a man whose body has been listening even while his mind was asleep. "News," he said. "She's stable," Elliot said. "Going to be okay?" Marcus pressed both fists briefly together in front of his chest. A gesture that was not a prayer exactly, but occupied the same space prayers do the place where gratitude lives when it has no other container. Then he settled back, let out a long, slow breath. "Good," he said. Just that. But the weight behind it was enormous. Gloria had turned from the window. Her face was composed, but her eyes were doing something entirely their own. She reached up and touched the notepad in her lap, just touched it lightly with her fingertips and said, "Thank God." Simple, unadorned, and meant in the most literal way possible. Carmen appeared from the galley. She had heard, she could tell from the faces. She stood at the entrance to the cabin for a moment, and then she did something that was not in any airline manual or training protocol. She pressed one hand over her mouth very briefly and let herself feel it just for a moment, just long enough to be human about it. Then she dropped her hand, straightened, and walked back to work. 22 minutes to Los Angeles. The descent had begun. The city was somewhere below them, invisible still, but present. The sprawl and the heat and the particular light of Southern California waiting under the clouds. Robert turned to face forward. He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket, the designer jacket that had fit wrong since Denver, and took out his wallet. From the wallet, he took a card, a business card, white and clean, his name and title and number printed on it in a font that cost more than most people's lunch. He held it for a moment. Then he leaned across the empty seat in 3B, across the folded blanket, across the space that Jasmine had occupied, and he placed the card on Carmen's service tray as she passed. Carmen looked at it then, at him. "For whatever legal process comes from today," he said, "I'm not going to fight it. I want that on record. Whatever Denise Carter and her daughter decide to do, I'm not going to contest it." He paused. "And if there's a way to send something to the hospital, she's in flowers or whatever is appropriate, I want to do that through the airline, through you, whatever the right way is." Carmen looked at the card, then at him again. She picked up the card. "I'll pass this to our legal team," she said carefully, "and I'll find out the appropriate way to—" "I'm not trying to buy anything," he said. The words came out before he could dress them up, raw and direct. "I know how it looks. I'm not. I just want her to know that someone on that flight was thinking about her. After he stopped, even the wrong person." Carmen looked at him for a long moment, professionally, carefully. Then something shifted behind her eyes. Not forgiveness, not absolution, not anything that simple. Just a woman looking at another human being and making an honest assessment of what she saw. "I'll pass it along," she said. She walked away. Elliot had watched this exchange. He did not comment on it. It was not his to comment on. He had his opinion, several of them, in fact, nuanced and complicated, and not easily reduced to a verdict, and he kept them where they belonged, inside. What he said instead, after a moment, was, "What you just did doesn't undo what happened." "I know that," Robert said immediately. "It also doesn't mean nothing," Elliot said. Robert looked at him. "Both things can be true," Elliot said. "That's usually how it works." Robert held his gaze. Then he nodded slowly. The nod of a man who has just been given something he did not know he needed, and is not sure yet what to do with it. 15 minutes to Los Angeles. The city appeared below them, the grid of it, the endless horizontal stretch of streets and neighborhoods and lives, and the familiar choreography of landing preparation moved through the cabin. Tray tables, seat backs, the click and rustle of people gathering themselves for arrival. Gloria closed her notepad and put it in her bag. She had what she came for, the story, the real one. Not the one that started with a man kicking a sick girl, though it started there. The one that lived underneath that. The one about a 14-year-old who had learned to hold her chin up so long that it had become the most natural posture she had, the most true thing about her. The one about a mother who had wrapped her love around her daughter so completely that even at 37,000 feet, even in the worst of it, that girl had felt held. She was going to tell that story on a Sunday evening to the grandchildren who asked for something real. And she was going to tell it right. Marcus straightened his seat and put his phone away and looked out the window at the city coming up to meet them. He was thinking about his own daughter. She was 19, studying communications at a school in Maryland. Perpetually irritated with him about something, and also, he knew, perpetually proud of him in the way that daughters are perpetually proud of fathers they would never tell. He was going to call her the second he got off this plane. Not to tell her what happened. She would ask too many questions, and he was too tired. But just to hear her voice, just to have that, just to know she was there. 10 minutes to Los Angeles. The cabin had the particular quiet of final approach. The city was close. The details were sharpening below. Rooftops, roads, the geometric order of it all. Elliot thought about the appointment Jasmine had missed. The specialist in L.A., the one Denise had called 3 times to get the one she had waited 4 months for. He thought about what it meant to reschedule that appointment, the weeks of waiting, the uncertainty that would stretch through those weeks, the particular cruelty of being sick and not yet knowing fully what you were sick with, and having the answer delayed again. He had a colleague in Los Angeles. David Park, pediatric gastroenterologist, trained at Johns Hopkins, practiced at Cedars-Sinai. One of the best he knew. They had trained together, kept in touch the way doctors keep in touch irregularly, genuinely, with mutual respect that had survived 20 years of diverging paths. He picked up his phone, typed a message, read it back, sent it. The message said, "David Longstory, young patient, 14 partial small intestine obstruction, currently at Children's Hospital, Colorado. Mother was trying to get to you. Had appointment at your office. They had to divert. Her name is Jasmine Carter. Please call me when you land." He sent it, put the phone in his jacket pocket. It was a small thing. It was not saving anyone, but it was what he could do. And it was real. And after a day of sitting at the edges of what was in his control, doing something that was clearly within it, felt like breathing. 5 minutes. The wheels came down with their mechanical funk, the same sound as Denver, the same commitment to the ground. The runway appeared. The engines reversed. The city of Los Angeles was happening around them. The ordinary, continuous, enormous fact of it, indifferent and alive, entirely unaware that a plane had just landed carrying the residue of something that had happened at altitude and changed several people in ways they were still in the middle of understanding. The plane slowed, turned, taxied toward the gate. Carmen's voice came over the PA, warm, steady, professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles International Airport. Local time is 4:47 p.m. On behalf of Captain Hayes and the entire crew, we want to thank you for your patience today. We know this was not the flight any of you planned for. We hope you'll travel with us again." A brief pause, then, in a register that was very slightly different from the professional register, just slightly, just enough. "And we hope those of you who need to know that everyone is going to be okay." The cabin was quiet for a moment, and then Marcus, from 4A, started to clap. It was a single, slow, deliberate clap, not celebratory, not performative. The kind of clap that is not about sound, but about witness, about acknowledging something. Gloria joined it. Then the couple in 1A and 1B. Then the man in 5C, who had spent most of the flight with his headphones in. Then others further back, where the applause spread from the front as the word traveled through the aircraft, the way things travel in enclosed spaces, fast and complete. Carmen stood at the front of the cabin. She did not cry. She was too professional to cry. But she pressed her lips together, and she looked at the faces of the people applauding, and she held that look for as long as she needed to hold it. And then she nodded, once deeply, the nod of someone who understands exactly what is being acknowledged. Robert Calloway did not clap. He sat with his hands in his lap, and he listened to the sound around him. The sound of people who had been through something together, arriving on the other side of it, and he did not pretend that he was part of that. He knew what his part had been. He was sitting with it. But he did not look away either. He did not close himself off from it. He sat in it, in the sound of it, in the accumulated weight of what the day had been. And he let it land on him the way it needed to land. That was the most he could do right now. And he knew somewhere underneath the jacket and the title and all the careful architecture of the man he had constructed over 46 years that it was not enough. That it was a beginning. That beginnings are supposed to be insufficient. That's why they're called beginnings. The gate appeared. The jet bridge connected. The door opened. Passengers began to move. The ordinary flow of arrival. Bags from overhead bins. Phones coming back to life with the buzzing of accumulated notifications. The shuffle and press of people who have a next thing to get to. Marcus was up quickly, his carry-on down from the bin in one motion. He paused at the end of the row. He looked at the empty seat in 3B one more time. Then he looked at Elliot. "Tell me you got her doctor's contact information," he said. Not a question, almost a challenge. The kind of thing a man says when he needs to know the story has someone carrying it forward. "Working on it," Elliot said. Marcus pointed at him. Once the gesture said, "Good." Then he was gone, moving up the aisle, disappearing into the flow. Gloria was moving more slowly, as older women sometimes do in jet bridge lines, with the patience of someone who has learned that most urgency is invented. She stopped at Elliot's row. She looked at him over her reading glasses. "You're a good doctor," she said. "I tried to be today," he said. No, she was firm about it. Gentle but firm the way she had been firm about things for 71 years. "You are not just today." "You are." She paused. She knew it, that girl. That's why she asked you if you were scared. She was reading you, and she trusted what she read. She straightened. That's not something every patient can do, and it's not something every doctor earns. She moved on before he could respond. He sat there for a moment after she passed in the emptying cabin in the seat he had barely occupied for most of this flight. He was tired. He was aware of it now in a way he had not let himself be while it was happening. The specific bone-deep tiredness of sustained focus finally releasing. He stood, got his bag, moved toward the door. He passed 3B. He looked at the folded blanket. He reached out and touched it just briefly, just the back of his fingers, against the thin fabric, and then he took his hand away and kept walking. Robert was the last passenger in first class to stand. He waited until the aisle was clear. Then he reached into the overhead bin and got his bag. He put it on his shoulder. He stood in the aisle for a moment and looked at the seat where Jasmine had been, the same way everyone else had looked at it today, with the recognition that what had happened in that seat was not going to stop having happened just because the flight was over. He walked to the door. Carmen was standing there as she always stood, greeting passengers and saying goodbye to them out the bookends of the job. She looked at him. He looked at her. He said, "I'm going to do better." Carmen looked at him for a long moment. She held the look the way a doctor holds a diagnosis. Not rushing past it, not softening it, not making it easier than it should be. Then she said, "I know that's for you to decide, not me to judge." A beat. "But I hope you mean it." "I do," he said. She nodded once. He stepped through the door. The jet bridge was long and fluorescent and utterly ordinary, and Robert Calloway walked through it, carrying everything the day had put in him. All the pieces of himself he had not looked at clearly before today. The ones that the girl in seat 3B had lit up without trying, without asking, to simply by sitting beside him and being 14 and sick and completely stubbornly, impossibly herself. He did not know what he was going to do with the pieces. He did not know if the donation would matter, or if Carmen's legal team would call, or what Denise Carter would decide, or what any of it would look like from the other side of time. He did not know if he would become someone different from this, or if the usual gravity of habit would pull him back to who he had been before the jet bridge in New York, before the first-class cabin, before the girl. He did not know, but he walked. 2 weeks later, Elliot received a text from David Park. It said, "Jasmine Carter took her case. Good catch on that obstruction. Another few hours, and we'd have been talking surgery. She's responding well. No surgery needed. She's going home Thursday." And then, after a pause, a second message. "She wanted me to tell the doctor on the plane something. She said to tell him, you were right. Counting down works." Elliot read it twice. He was standing in a hospital hallway in New York, between a patient consult and a staff meeting in the rushing, ordinary current of his life. He read it twice, and then he stood still for a moment, and he smiled. The real kind, the kind that starts in the chest and travels up unhurried and complete. He typed back, "Tell her I'm going to use that from now on." He put his phone in his pocket. He walked down the hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed. The hospital moved around him, full of people fighting for something, full of people holding on. And Jasmine Carter, 14 years old, was going home on Thursday. She had held her chin up through every single minute of it. She had held her chin up. And that was the thing that nobody on that flight would ever stop carrying. In whatever pocket of themselves, they kept the things that mattered most. The girl who held her chin up. Not because she had to perform it for anyone, not because she was told to, but because it was the only way she knew to be. Because her mother had given her that. Because she had made it her own. Because at the end of everything, when the plane was on the ground, and the story had landed, and all the pieces had settled into the shapes they were going to hold, the only thing that could not be kicked or dismissed or relocated to a different seat was the simple, undefeatable fact of who Jasmine Carter was. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.